Good morning. I'm Stas Margaronis, California ports reporter for the American Journal of Transportation. My guest today is Mario Cordero, Executive Director, Port of Long Beach. Mario, good morning, and thanks for being with us.
Well, thank you so much, Stas, and I appreciate the American Journal of Transportation reaching out to the Port of Long Beach.
Mario, you guys, both you and Los Angeles are in the news. Yesterday, Gene Soroka at his press briefing said that the biggest factor in recent cargo declines, which began in August, is that importers are moving more of their goods to East Coast and Gulf Coast ports due to protracted labor negotiations. And he said, we've got to get that cargo back. According to the Wall Street Journal, October volumes for LA and Long Beach are down by 26% compared to the same month a year ago. Mario, what's your take on the present situation, and is there light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, number one, there is light at the end of the tunnel. I think we're always in the news because we are the largest, most significant container gateway in the nation. You know, the gateway that approximates the most important trade region, which is Asia. So I think let's put this in the proper context. The loss of import volume should be no surprise to anyone. This was forecasted earlier in the year. In fact, you may recall, Stas, that early this year, with regard to what does 2022 look like, I said that the second half of 2022, we were going to see some semblance of normalization. And that's exactly what we're seeing. So in terms of the loss of volume, again, I'm not too concerned about that because, again, we've been here before. That is the San Pedro Bay complex, where people project like the sky is going to fall here. And I think time and time again, history proves that this gateway will continue to be competitive. Now, needless to say, over the years, there has been a percentile loss of discretionary cargo. But, you know, when you look at the big picture in terms of the nation, you know, my colleagues at the other ports, whether it's East Coast or Gulf, New York, New Jersey, Savannah, Charleston, go down the line, they've all had their respective capital improvement investment or projects. They are competing for this business, and you know they've done a very good job of at least establishing choices for our shippers. But at the end of the day, I think at least for the Port of Long Beach, we're going to focus on customer service, and I think we'll be fine in terms of the years to come. Because again, at the end of the day, like I indicated, is how do you serve your customer best? And Stas, as you know, that at least at this point, what we need to do is to have a transformation on how we operate. And again, I think we're doing well. And more importantly, I think from the big picture, let's not lose sight of the fact that the economy is relatively good compared to other nations in the world. There is slow growth in the economy, but on the other hand, that's been by design to a certain extent with regard to the Fed monetary policies to address the inflationary rate.
One of the questions that's on everybody's mind is the ILWU PMA negotiations. For the second time in a week, the Port of Oakland was shut down by actions caused by the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, which does not yet have a contract. And as you know, your colleague, Gene Soroka at Los Angeles, is now predicting that negotiations will now drag on into 2023. The situation is beginning to look a little bit like some of the problems we saw during 2014, 2015, which were very deleterious to shippers, both imports and exports. How do you see the labor situation going down? And is there light at the end of the tunnel there either?
I do believe there's light at the end of the tunnel. There will be a resolution at some point, but let's keep in mind that 2014, and that was a very challenging year for the San Pedro Bay complex for the reasons you just stated, but we had the similar type of commentary that we were going to lose cargo, it was never going to come back. And what happened since? I think, again, This gateway is going to continue to be a significant gateway. Both ports have had record years in the last couple of years. And when you talk about both the Port of Long Beach and Los Angeles moving 20 million, in excess of 20 million TEUs in year 2021, I think, again, we may have a bump in the road, but going forward, again, this is going to continue to be a very competitive gateway. So I'm very optimistic, despite the fact that, again, as has been referenced, the labor negotiations have been protracted, but at the end of the day, there will be a resolution at some point.
We have seen data from Descartes that's indicated that imports from China are down, but that the volume has apparently moved to other East Asian countries. What is your expectation with trade with China? Will we continue to see declines? Are we seeing a movement away from China and sourcing from other East Asian countries?
Well, number one, we do have a global economic slowdown, that's for sure. As you mentioned, imports to the United States from China have diminished. And again, that has affected all gateways. But in terms of going forward, before the pandemic, I think if you talk to most shippers, there was a policy China +1. I think that's going to continue. But just this week, we've now read that the conversations between President Biden and President Xi have been very positive. They're going to be addressing some of the trade issues, some of the tariff obstacles that were put in place by the prior administration. So again, nothing's going to change significantly. So going forward, again, as we look to 2023, certainly when you're going to, whether it's April 2023 or October 2023, if you're going to look to year growth, you're not going to have the kind of growth that we've had in the last 2 years. This was sort of an anomaly in terms of how this surge occurred because of the century pandemic that we experienced.
On another subject, the Pacific Merchant Shipping Association and other stakeholders have been critical of zero emission mandates for equipment and trucks. John McLaurin, the president of PMSA, has been very vocal on the issue. As you know, I talked to your colleague Heather Tomley about this issue a couple of days ago. There's obviously a lot of concern, especially about trucks meeting zero emission mandates for 2024. You've been expressed confidence that the LA Long Beach Clean Air Action Plan requirements for zero emission equipment in 2030 and zero emission trucks in 2035 can be met. Are you still that confident?
Yes. I mean, let's keep in mind that the Clean Air Action Plan update of 2017, a endeavor in partnership with the Port of LA, let's remind everybody that these two ports were the first to set a zero emission goal. So I think, again, it's fair to say that there's no other port authority in the world that has zero emission goals as we do, and that announced it in the way that we did early on in 2017. So in terms of what the respective objectives here, I think that for the state of California, we are known as environmental stewards on the issue of climate change. When I say we, it's every sector here, including the port sector. So as to the PMSA posture, I will say that I think there's a lot of expectation that the zero emission technology is going to be ready before we stated what those goals were going to be. That is before 2030 as it relates to cargo handling equipment, and before 2035 as it relates to trucks. So unfortunately, there's an expectation that the technology is there and ready to go. And the fact of the matter is, it is not. I mean, right now, according to CARB's goals, they have a goal of, per their plan at CARB, of 570 zero emission trucks by 2025. And of those 570, 510, and this is statewide, this is just not the port, statewide, 510 will be electric. Now, possibly we might be able as a state to get there. I mean, like I said, it is moving, but it's not going to move fast enough to have any expectation that we're going to have 20,000 zero emission trucks in the San Pedro Bay complex anytime soon. Will we have a significant zero emission option before 2035 as it relates to trucks? I think we will. But again, it is a goal that we set back in 2017, not because the ports got together and said, let's just put a year out there. It was based on in-depth studies with the respective experts and consultants who estimated that that would probably be the time where we could have the kind of commercial availability of technology and trucks to make this happen.
One example of your success, of course, is Long Beach Container Terminal.
Right.
And that terminal is almost totally electrified. You've just announced that you received a grant from the Maritime Administration to replace some diesel powered tractors that were still on the yard there. Is Long Beach Container Terminal a role model for container terminals for the rest of the port? It's both San Pedro Bay ports and ultimately for the United States?
Well, with regard to the grant you're making reference to, we received $30 million to transition equipment there, top loaders, 60. We're going to have 60 transition of diesel equipment to zero emission equipment that's human operated. So I think that's a great accomplishment. And again, indicates the progress that we have made here at the Port of Long Beach with regard to maintaining what we promised as a goal in terms of transitioning to zero emission. Now, the latest, of course, is a great win-win for everybody. A win for the environmental progress of not just reducing emissions, eliminating emissions from the equipment in question. A win for labor because it's human operated equipment. And of course, a win for the terminal because it consistently moves forward to expand on the efficiencies and what we have to offer to our customers. And last, I will say this, prior to that allocation, Port of Long Beach already has 17%, 17% of our cargo handling equipment at this port that's zero emission. That is a percentile that no other port in the country meets. So again, I'm very confident that we've done our part. It's a slow progress, but again, it's going to be a monumental accomplishment when we get there.
Very good. Mario, the Port of Long Beach recently announced that it is joining the Green Ship Program. And last week, Gene Soroka spoke to the Storms, Flooding, and Sea Level Defense Conference, which is produced by the Propeller Club and the Society of American Military Engineers. He discussed progress that has been made on the Green Ship Program, collaboration between Los Angeles and Shanghai. The Port of Long Beach is now part of that collaboration, including other ports. What is the expectation from this program, and will the diverse foreign flag carriers be able to move in a direction of bringing their fleets down to carbon neutral anytime soon? This has been a big issue on the International Maritime Organization front. The source of these pollutants is a major issue at the climate change talks in Egypt that are happening right now. Can this be a means, this Green Ship Program, of bringing the container fleets to some sort of carbon neutral status anytime soon?
Well, the Port of Long Beach has been in discussions on this subject matter for quite a while. And as you mentioned, we are also participants in the Green Shipping Corridor that you've referenced, the Shanghai San Pedro Bay complex. The good news is that there's more conversation. Just more recently, the Port of Long Beach engaged in conversations with Singapore with regard to the shipping corridor there. So I think what you're starting to see, Stas, is a global conversation with regard to green shipping corridors, be it the Trans-Pacific, the North China Asia trade route, or the Atlantic trade route. And I think what this signifies is that the carriers are very much now open to having this conversation. Now, again, what's the good news here? Well, about a decade ago, when we solely relied on bunker fuel as we knew it, the IMO moved forward with identifying ecozones. And in the West Coast, we have the ecozone applicable here, which requires low sulfur contents of the bunker fuel that we were used to. That was tremendous progress. So what's been the next step now? Well, now you have major carriers talking about alternative fuels, LNG. Now, LNG may not be popular to some people in the environmental community, but the fact of the matter is it does have an impact in reducing emissions as a bridge to get to where we need to go. Now, where we are going is interesting conversations about the fuel of that's being talked about, green ammonia, methanol. That's another step in the right direction. So what all this adds to is that, again, it's evidentiary of the collaboration that the carriers are having, that they are trying to do what they can to set the road towards green shipping corridors and eventually a zero emission potential. It's not going to happen in the near future. But when you look to what we've been able to do here, particularly in the West Coast, compared to what the case was 10 years ago, significant improvement in all respects, whether it's trucks, whether it's carriers, and of course, for the Port of Long Beach and Los Angeles, that is why we are very optimistic about our zero emission goals. Now, my last comment on that is, I think what the challenge is an unfortunate potential scenario of the industry being penalized for not reaching zero emission goals in a very short period. I hope that is not the case, because it's one thing to penalize people for not using equipment that's there, but it's another thing to penalize people for equipment that's not there. So I think I'm hopeful we move forward in a pragmatic approach, because I think when you look at what the ports in California have done, more specifically the Port of Long Beach and Los Angeles, look what we've accomplished since the 2006 Clean Air Action Plan. The metrics are just undeniable in terms of the progress that we have made.
Thank you for that, Mario. I have two questions regarding stakeholders at the port. Number one, the Agriculture Transportation Coalition members have continued to be very vocal about problems that they have had with the carriers. Last year and earlier this year, there were a number of complaints about being able to get space on vessels. As you know, the new Ocean Shipping Reform Act, which through your past chairmanship at FMC, you're very familiar with, prompted exporters to go to the FMC to ask for help dealing with problems with the carriers. Do you feel that the carriers have responded to the complaints of exporters? And will we see a better export climate for our agricultural exporters in 2023?
Well, I do feel that the carriers are very cognizant of these issues and have been for a few years. So I think, again, one thing I can say to you is that the White House, as you know, appointed a port envoy to the San Pedro Bay complex back in September of last year. In that situation, in that case, it was John Picardi, who did a great job in bringing everybody together here in the San Pedro Bay complex to address a myriad of issues related to the pandemic and related to some of the questions that you've asked this morning. That's been followed by the current envoy, General Stephen Lyons, who has followed the excellent leadership that John Picardi laid out. So I think in those discussions, I think you have seen the carriers come to the table to try to address some of the issues that have related to this, particularly the San Pedro Bay complex. And of course, overall, the bigger picture in terms of the issues that we need to do is to diminish the costs here, diminish the liability to our exporters or exposure of high demurrage and detention costs. This is a collaborative approach. It's not just the carriers, it's the terminals. And quite frankly, the port authorities weighed in. So as you may know, I'm very supportive of the ACTC and their advocacy and have been for years. When Congressman Garamendi first introduced the bill to amend the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, I think I was the first and only executive director of a port authority to support that. I thought that that bill had legs, and obviously it did. It was a bipartisan movement to ultimately have that bill passed in Congress and signed by the president. So I think that signifies how important this issue is. It's important to this administration. It was important to the administration that I served in, the Obama administration, which, as you recall, in the first 100 days, President Obama laid out the National Export Initiative. So this is an ongoing subject matter that, again, is very important to us, is very important to the country, and needless to say, very important to our shippers, our export shippers. So I do see that we're going to make continued progress with regard to what we need to do. And so I look forward to 2023 and having, again, more conversation about these related issues.
Thank you. My next question addresses the issue of the railroads. As you know, there were considerable dwell time delays going into this year with rail, with UP and the BNSF and their ability to move containers off the docks. And at one point, I think we saw reports that there were 13 days of dwell time delays at both Los Angeles and Long Beach. That situation has gotten much better. The economy has changed. You are in the process at the Port of Long Beach of upgrading your on-dock rail capability. What is your projection for better rail traffic in 2023? And bearing in mind that we are seeing the possibility of a looming national rail strike happening sometime in the near future?
Well, number one, Stas, as you are aware, I've been very critical of the Class I railroads during this pandemic crisis that we've experienced, more specifically because of the lack of rail cars. Now, I've said previously that for being the largest container gateway in the nation and the most significant and strategic gateway, to me, it's just unacceptable that we continue to have equipment issues, whether it's chassis or in this case, rail cars, equipment issues that are available here at the San Pedro Bay complex. So this has been an ongoing issue that surfaces when we do have unforeseeable events, and of course, in this case, COVID-19, because, you know, quite frankly, we need to ask ourselves the question, does the nation's largest port complex in terms of their availability of rail cars depend on what happens in Chicago? It shouldn't. And I think, again, but the good news is that BNSF on October 1st announced a state-of-the-art intermodal facility. You know, the big project, the Barstow International Gateway intermodal facility. Stas, that's going to have an allocation of plus 4,000 acres. Now, that is a game changer. Yes, we've been talking about inland port connectivity, and as you are aware, in California, there's about 2 or 3 groups that are moving forward an inland port concept. But what's unique about this one, this is being brought forth by a Class I railroad. That's been the missing link as to why we have not improved on inland port connectivity. So despite the challenges that we've experienced, I'm very optimistic that as we approach the next decade, in combination with the BNSF endeavor and the Port of Long Beach Pier B rail enhancement facility, ironically, they're moving on a path of completion at the same time. So going back to your initial question about the competitiveness of the Port of Long Beach and the San Pedro Bay complex for that matter, when you look at in terms of what's going to happen here by the end of 2030, it's going to be a game changer in terms of the rail investments that we've made. We may not see, again, significant progress in 2023, with regard to rail, but certainly the first milestone of the Pier B rail enhancement facility is in 2025, and then there's 3 phases thereafter. So in the next 8 years, you're going to see significant progress on intermodal movement here. And last, I'll say this. One of the things that was very challenging during these crises is how the reduction of IPI on dock cargo we saw here in San Pedro Bay Complex. It was all the way down to around 21%, you know, and there was a lot of reasons for that. But I think the good news is we are moving forward to not only reduce long-dwelled IPI cargo, which was a significant challenge. And there, I want to thank both UP and BNSF with regard to their efforts to do that. So in 2023, I see not only a normalization of the supply chain here in Southern California, but again, equipment issues to be mitigated, but there's still work ahead, not only with regard to rail car availability in instances where there is a bottleneck, but the other issue is chassis. I'm going to be speaking a lot louder in 2023 about chassis because this is another equipment issue that should not in the future repeat itself.
Are you confident that the chassis shortage that we saw this year and last year is behind us?
No. The reason I say no is because if you look to the history, whether it's a carrier bankruptcy, whether it's a labor negotiation, whether it's an unforeseen event like a pandemic, at the top of the list is the lack of interoperability of chassis. So we need to fix this. What I'm confident is I'm going to be very loud about what we need to do here in the San Pedro Bay Complex. The pool of pools was a great step in 2014, but it's not the answer. The next step has to be a neutral manager model, a gray pool. Because if anything that we have learned in this crisis, lessons learned, that's one that we have to focus on. And I'm hopeful, as General Lyons stated, that as we start moving to the normalization of the supply chain, we don't walk away thinking, oh, everything is okay now, and now we don't have to talk about the issues that we need to be talking about so that in the future, at least we mitigate the potential factors that had caused this bottleneck and congestion in the West Coast.
My last question has to do with my colleague and friend, Laura Covery, is a professor at Cal State Long Beach. She is a retired mariner, and she has been advocating a adopt the ship program for Long Beach schools, and also that there should be more education about the maritime industry and the potential of maritime jobs. I was at the Propeller Club convention in Athens in September, and in Greece, maritime education is a requirement in high schools. And I wondered whether you thought that the port it should be encouraging more maritime education, and whether there's a role for doing something like Covery's Adopt the Ship program in Long Beach schools.
Well, the Port of Long Beach has been very involved with the education sector, whether it's the colleges, Long Beach City College, whether it's Cal State Long Beach. And this was part of our plan of action in accordance with the Green Port policy that was set out back in 2005. The specific component was community engagement with our universities and education institutions. So we have a very good record of how we've been able to do that. But I think as to the one that you just cited, I'd be more than happy to work with my alumni, Long Beach State, to explore this, because I think I do agree. People need to know more, the next generation, about the importance of not only ports, but maritime operations overall. Obviously, right now, we have a lot of good synergy given all the attention that's been placed on the supply chain, whether it's by the president, whether it's by the chairman of the Federal Reserve, and of course, by consumers and the relative business entities. So again, we've gone through a period that's been challenging But some of the positives that have happened from this crisis that we've undergone is the nation really understands now the importance of the supply chain, the importance of having a resilience in the supply chain. You know, we had Governor Newsom come here to the Port of Long Beach in November of last year to hold a press conference. I mean, for me, that was huge to have a governor come to the Port of Long Beach and talk about the supply chain. So, and not only did the governor talk about it, as you know, his budget includes funding for California ports. So we're in a very good time, and taking the words from John Picardi that he said earlier this year at a conference, this is the golden age of ports. We have the national support for ports, and we have funding, hopefully more funding in the years to come. But to your point, it gives us greater incentive to make sure that the next generation understands the importance of water ports. They're as important as airports. And I think this has been a challenge for ports for many, many years. So I do hope that going forward, we have a golden opportunity, as John Picardi referenced, to continue not only the attention to the supply chain, but to educate people how important that supply chain is and the resilience of that. And you mentioned one important reason. I mean, I think, again, people need to understand the importance of maritime overall. And I think that's a curriculum that we need to pay more attention to.
Mario Cordero, Executive Director, Port of Long Beach, thank you very much for your time, and best wishes for you and your colleagues at the port in 2023.
Thank you, Stas. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.